This afternoon, we are going to focus our presentation on acculturation. So the goal of this presentation is to provide a very brief overview on perspectives, patterns, and outcomes. So to do this, I'm going to describe a little bit about migration and the various disciplines that studied migration, but I'm going to really largely draw from psychological literature. So discussion of immigration and migration and the related processes are very salient in our context of South Florida, but also our national context. It is noteworthy, however, to say that migration has been ongoing for thousands of years. And the study of migration is a complex endeavor that involves multiple perspectives, multiple disciplines, as well as multiple levels of analysis. So indeed, many disciplines, many social sciences and health sciences have addressed migration. So for example, disciplines like sociology, economics, anthropology, political science have adopted a broad perspective for studying migration. They tended to, for example, examine trends in migrants' destination countries, availability of social benefits, so for example, education for migrants, healthcare, access for migrants, labor market participation, and of course, political sciences have tended to look at migration within a policy focus, contrasting assimilation, multiculturalism, and intercultural policies. Public health, social work, and other health-related fields focus on impacts of migration and migration-related variables. For example, looking at how immigration policies affect migrant health outcomes and how to reduce disparities among migrant population. For example, being able to identify policies and practices to facilitate education of immigrant students have been the goals of other disciplines, in particular social work, health-related education. Psychologists view migration processes as interactions between the person and the context. One such migration process is acculturation. So what is it? Before we define that, it's really important that I note that acculturation theory emerged within sociology and anthropology. And sociologists and anthropologists have explained changes in cultural groups in contact. So that has been the definition of acculturation. Changes in cultural groups as a result of cultural contact. So the definition of acculturation is the process of cultural change that occurs when migrating individuals and groups come into contact with individuals in the receiving cultural context. To make a note of that conceptualization, it's also very important that we consider the definition of culture. So when we talk about culture, we're talking about the shared values, the shared beliefs, the shared practices that a group of people have in common, and they pass these on through symbols from one generation to the next. Defining acculturation has occurred within multiple perspectives. One model, one theoretical framework of acculturation has been assimilation theories. For example, Gordon, 1964, and other assimilation theorists believe that migrants' acculturation processes vary along a continuum, a linear continuum, such that people vary from completely unacculturated to completely acculturated. So completely unacculturated refers to individuals who are attached to their heritage cultural traditions and not to the receiving culture. Whereas those who are completely acculturated, they reject their heritage culture and become attached to the receiving culture. Such model, some have been criticized, right? These kinds of models have been criticized because they represent a zero-sum system where acculturation involves replacing one culture with another culture, rather than adding a new cultural stream to one's existing cultural repertoire. So the underlying assumption of assimilation model has been referred to as cultural shedding. And cultural shedding essentially is someone is the notion that individuals cannot have multiple cultural streams, so such that the person has to substitute one culture with another. Other models of acculturation have looked at a bidimensional conceptualization of acculturation. And so Berry proposed that receiving culture acquisition and heritage culture acquisition represent separate dimensions. And those dimensions crossed. So within Berry's model, those dimensions, the heritage culture dimension and the receiving culture dimension, they intersect to create cultural categories. So specifically acculturation categories. So for example, assimilation is a process by which a person adopts the receiving culture and discards the heritage culture. Separation is the process where the person rejects the receiving culture and retains the heritage culture. Marginalization is rejecting both the heritage culture and the receiving culture, whereas integration is adopting the receiving culture and retaining also the heritage culture. A number of studies that have used Berry's model have found that Berry's integration category is the most adaptive strategy, right, in terms of acculturating. And it is most adaptive, and it is associated with healthier outcomes for individuals. But there are some studies, it's also worth noting, when studies have looked at children in particular, right? When looking at children, assimilation may yield greater levels of adjustment for children. And that makes anecdotal sense, right? Because children, when they arrive in a receiving context, a lot of the cultural practices, values, beliefs of their heritage culture, they probably have not had enough contact with that heritage culture when they arrive here. And so there are some studies that have shown that assimilation in children is associated with greater level of adjustment outcomes, in particular in academic domains. Another conceptualization of acculturation is one that is multidimensional. Schwartz et al. Proposed a multi-dimensional model where cultural practices, cultural values, cultural identifications have to be examined during the acculturation process. If you recall, the definition of culture that is noted here is that the shared values, beliefs, and practices common to a group of people. So drawing from this definition, from Schwartz et al. Definition, a number of researchers have contended that practices, values, identification can all be grouped together, and they represent what changes as a result of cultural contact. So within Schwartz model, and Schwartz model is pretty expensive. It in fact inform more broadly the process of acculturation. And the reason that is because it includes the process of psychological change in each of these dimensions, practices, values, and identification that ensues as a result of cultural contact. What that assumes is that immigrants and their children adapt to life in the receiving cultural context, or they straddle both their heritage culture as well as their receiving culture. But to sort of like pin down exactly what changes is very, very, very complex. So, for example, within the context of Hispanic individuals, right, and Hispanic groups migrating to the United States, components of receiving culture includes speaking the English language, consuming American foods, endorsing individualist values, independent belief systems, whereas those who retain their heritage culture, right, they may continue to speak Spanish, continue to consume foods from their countries of origin, and maintain a sense of ethnic affirmation and pride. So this is not to say that there will be change in all of these dimensions, right? Those components may not change in tandem. They may change in tandem. Schwartz et al. Multidimensional model provides a framework that shows that acculturation as a process is not a singular, a unidimensional variable where people can be less acculturated to more acculturated. So for example, a person can be highly ethnically identified but not be fluent in the language of their parents, or to be the language of their heritage. That person's acculturation is inevitable. The person is acculturating. So they may be acculturating in a sort of a behavioral acculturation level. Individuals are diverse, and so is the process of acculturation. So for example, refugees and asylum seekers often experience traumatic events in their homelands. So for example, they might fear for their lives, right? They might watch family members being killed. That may increase difficulty in their ability to adjust in a new residing country, in a new receiving context. On the other end, sojourners, individuals who are in another country on a temporary basis, right? They might be here as a student, they might be here as working for a company on a temporary basis, right? Sojourners generally know that they are not staying permanently in the country, so their investment in incorporating the destination's cultures, values into their sense of self may be limited. Acculturation is experienced quite differently for different people, and that may occur differently across generations and across types of migrants. So often children, families, when they are immigrating with an E, right, they make that decision, right? And for children, they may experience a profound sense of loss, right? For being uprooted from their friends, for being uprooted from their extended family. Refugees also might experience conflicting emotions because they might have preferred to stay in their home country. So there is quite a bit of differences in the way that individuals go through the process of acculturation. Within Schwartz et al. Conceptualization of acculturation, some dimensions change, others may not. For example, Hispanic and Asian migrants who arrive in a context that is monocultural, let's say the Midwest of the United States, they may have little choice but to learn the English language and to associate with white Americans. Some researchers, for example, have documented that young people immigrating to ethnic enclaves, they are likely to be bicultural as adults, right? These adults, on the other hand, right, they may be separated to refer to Berry's conceptualization of acculturation. So how do we measure acculturation? Acculturation has been measured in various ways depending on the model that the researcher is adopting. So what is important from studies that have measured acculturation using a unidimensional model or a bidimensional model or a multidimensional model, what is really very important is that acculturation has to be measured in a way that is consistent with the lived experiences of migrants. Failure to do that can yield inaccurate findings regarding the person's acculturation process. One of the measures of acculturation that has been used is being born in the receiving country. So being born in the receiving country or having lived there for a longer period of time doesn't necessarily represent greater acculturation. So an example of that is living in the receiving country for 10 years within a setting where there is a lot of contact with host nationals, with individuals of the receiving context, can lead to greater levels of acculturation compared to residing in a receiving country, in an ethnic enclave, for 30 to 40 years. So using, for example, being born in the country or duration in the country as an index of acculturation can yield inaccurate results regarding the person's process of acculturation. Another way that acculturation has been measured is looking at language. So language is certainly a very powerful vehicle of culture, right? And it is a component of acculturation. But it may not necessarily map onto all the dimensions of acculturation. There are some, in fact, Portes and Woombound and colleagues have found that in a sample of Asian Americans, right, these individuals were not fluent in their heritage language, but they did show high level of engagement in heritage level cultural behaviors, and also showed high level of cultural endorsement of heritage cultural values. To conclude, I'd like to reiterate that acculturation is a complex process that involves multiple cultural streams, multiple domains, and it interacts between individual characteristics associated with the migrant. It also interacts with the migrant